And French President Emmanuel Macron has pushed Donald Trump for security guarantees to help bring the war in Ukraine to an end. Now, the two leaders appeared friendly in a press conference following their meeting, although the disagreements were still apparent. Sky News Washington correspondent Annalise Nielsen joins us live now. Annalise, Macron made a few concessions to Donald Trump.
Look, he was very charming from the get-go with Donald Trump, but it was clear that there are a few things the two leaders still simply disagree on, as both say they want to work towards the end of the war in Ukraine. In particular, what we heard from Emmanuel Macron was some very conciliatory words around the funding that the Europeans have put into the war in Ukraine, saying that European countries do need to be putting more of their GDP into, a percentage of their GDP into funding the war effort in Ukraine. But at the same time, what he's saying is to bring this to an end that will survive, they need to have some kind of resolution where there's a security guarantee, which essentially means forces from European countries, and his hope is US forces as well on the ground stationed there to act as a deterrent to stop the Russians trying anything like this again. He referenced multiple times the 2014 Minsk talks, saying that they'd already been through this and that's why they're here now. They didn't do enough to stop this kind of Russian aggression, and so that was the concern from the French side. He raised this in the press conference after the two leaders spoke privately in the Oval Office, and Donald Trump didn't give him much in return.
We didn't have security guarantees. So this is why being strong and having deterrence capacities is the only way to be sure it will be respected. And I insisted on that, and this is why I believe that the US has the capacity to do so. And this is why I think we should never say, I will never send any boots on the ground, because you give a blank check to violate any type of commitment.
There's tremendous distrust on both sides. That's why it's good that I'm coming in now. But I think it's to the very much benefit of Russia to make a deal and to go on with leading Russia in a very positive way. That's what you have to do. But I really believe that he wants to make a deal. Maybe wrong, but I believe he wants to make a deal.
These talks have happened not only on the third anniversary of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, but also the same day that there was a vote at the United Nations. It was supposed to be a motion condemning the Russian aggression in Ukraine. The Americans decided to vote against this one resolution and then abstain from a vote on another similar resolution that was put forward, and in doing so sided with countries like Iran, like North Korea, and it's been met with widespread condemnation, especially from Europeans. Donald Trump was asked about this in the Oval Office, and here was his response.
Can you explain the rationale in having the U.S. vote against the UN resolutions that Ukraine proposed and also the U.S. proposed?
I would rather not explain it now, but it's sort of self-evident, I think.
He also referenced a few times this minerals deal that he wants done with Volodymyr Zelensky in Ukraine. President Zelensky's held off on any kind of promise that he'll sign a deal because he says it shouldn't be done in return for what the US has spent, because it's simply not worth the same amount of money, and it's not that reciprocal commitment that was originally given by the US in the first place. But there does seem to be some progress on that front. And Donald Trump suggested that we may see Volodymyr Zelensky coming to the US in the next few weeks to sign that deal, but remains to be seen. He wasn't feeling too confident on that on the Ukrainian side, even as recently as yesterday.
OK, Annalise, thank you. Well, joining me live now for more on this in Canberra is former White House Chief of Staff and now Bondi Partners consultant Mick Mulvaney. Mick, lovely to see you. Good morning. I mean, a major shift in approach to Ukraine here.
It is, and I think you're going to see more of it, Holly. And good morning, by the way, from Canberra. What I think you're seeing is Donald Trump making a critical new sort of decision. And the decision he's making here is that he believes it to be in America's long-term best interest. I think he probably believes it's in Europe's long-term best interest as well, to be on good terms with Russia moving forward. Yes, they've invaded. Yes, it should be condemned. Yes, this is a problem. but I think Donald Trump is looking 20, 30, 40 years down the calendar, thinking to himself, we cannot be permanent enemies with Russia, and making additional condemnations now. For example, the UN would simply spoil that relationship moving forward. So I haven't talked to the president about this, but I know a little bit about how he thinks, and my guess is that's what's going through his head. Not just what happens today, but what happens 20 years from now as a result of what happens today.
Yeah, I mean, we would all like to know exactly what's going on in his mind, but I mean, this exactly puts the US at the moment at odds with its longtime European allies at the moment, though, doesn't it? What happens to this relationship now?
It's going to be fascinating to watch. It's going to be a challenge. There's no question. I don't think anybody would be surprised if I said the two gentlemen who were sitting there in the Oval Office on your previous video clip don't care for each other very well. I've seen the two of them interact. They are not close. Trump does not like Macron, and Macron certainly does not like Trump. And Trump does tend to deal on personal relationships. Ever since Britain left the EU, I think it's sort of soured Trump on his view towards Europe more broadly. He likes the United Kingdom a great deal, but doesn't really have a working partner in Europe since the Brits left. So, yeah, I think the tension will continue. Trump will continue to push them on making additional contributions to their own defense, spending additional money on defense. He'll use trade to sort of push that point. But it's going to be a fascinating next 4 years because, yeah, I think there's not a realignment, Holly. That's too strong of a word. But certainly I think the Trump administration is reviewing the relationship the United States has with Europe and as to whether or not Europe will be an equal partner going forward.
Mick, interesting point you make there that they don't like each other. It seemed a pretty friendly, so to speak, press conference. Macron wants security guarantees. Do you think Trump will listen?
I do. I've always thought, and I've traveled a good bit in Europe. I've talked on this topic now with folks for the last 2 or 3 years. Like, everybody knows how the war ends. It ends with Ukraine giving up some territory, including Crimea, which not nearly enough people talk about after the invasion in 2014. We sort of simply assume that that's a done thing. But in exchange for that Ukraine would get additional security guarantees. So I think that is the balance. That is the mix. That's where they will ultimately end up. How the negotiations get to that point, well, of course, no one can say. But yes, I think at the end of the day, there'd be a ceding of some territory in the Ukraine in exchange for closer ties to the West, not including accession into NATO. I think that's probably a red line for the Russians.
I mean, Mick, what do you make of all of this about the rare minerals? Trump, has argued that Ukraine should give the US something in return for the aid that it's given, essentially. But this suggests Ukraine's rare minerals. What do you make of that?
Yeah, that's Trump, the deal maker. It's really what it does is turns a lot of the grants into loans and so forth. And you did see Macron interrupt Trump and try to clarify the record on Europe. Europe is doing loans, which is, I think, the point Trump was trying to make. They're also doing grants. I think Trump is simply trying to figure out a way to get something out of this. He doesn't perceive, I don't think, Holly, how Ukraine in and of itself is really in America's best interest. Certainly, preventing Russian aggression is in America's best interest, but a close relationship with Ukraine in and of itself, I don't think Trump sees much value there. If you put critical minerals on the table, then you have a negotiation, you have a mutually beneficial relationship. I think the Ukrainians, however, were right to point out that Trump asked, I think, for 3 or 4 times as much money in rare earth minerals that the United States has pledged to support Ukraine. So what you might be seeing is just an old-fashioned negotiation between two deal makers.
Now, Mick, of course, Elon Musk is in our news cycle every day, just as much as Trump, almost. What's really going on here? What's your take on all of this?
Yeah, there's two different discussions here, Holly. There's a discussion between the Trump team, or a battle, tension. Let's use that word. It's not a battle, and it's more than a discussion between the Trump team and the deep state. We're seeing a video this morning that someone at one of the government agencies put a very unflattering video of Donald Trump kissing Elon Musk's feet on the televisions at a federal agency. The deep state is real. Bureaucrats who work for the government, who hate Donald Trump, are real. And part of what you're seeing is the tension between the incoming Trump team and that deep state. The underlying, the larger, more interesting, I think, discussion is the tension between, in our government, the legislative branch and the executive branch. This goes all the way back to Thomas Jefferson. Presidents have always chafed at being told and required to spend money they don't want to spend. And that, it's called the impoundment battle. I know that doesn't mean anything, but this tension between the two branches of government, co-equal branches of government under our constitutional system, is really what's the fundamental underpinning of this. Trump is pushing as hard as he can to expand executive authority and limit legislative authority. And when that happens, what you'll see is ultimately the Supreme Court will get involved, and we'll have a good long look at our Constitution about the interplay between the branches.
Inevitably, the courts are going to get involved here. Mick, we have to leave things there for today. Always great to see you. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Holly.